Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Fighting Inflammation with Your Fork, a webinar brought to you by the Stay Fit Plan. My name is Marjorie Bates. I'm a registered dietitian, and I have my master's degree in applied nutrition, and I'm really excited to speak to you today about some strategies that you can implement to reduce inflammation through food. Before we get started, just a quick disclosure reminding you that you cannot use this information to replace the recommendations provided by your physician. This is purely educational and informational for your reference. Okay, so let's review the learning objectives for today. First, we're going to define inflammation and talk about the differences between acute and chronic inflammation. We're going to discuss chronic inflammation as it relates to your risk factor for certain diseases. And we're going to look at the relationship between obesity and body composition and inflammation. We're going to go through 4 key topics related to nutrition, phytonutrients, fiber, probiotics, and healthy fats, and how these relate to inflammation in your body. I'm going to provide you with some helpful links and some references at the end. Okay, so what is inflammation? Inflammation is a reaction that your body has to injury or infection. It's often characterized by swelling, redness, maybe pain, and the inflammation is often triggered when a tissue is injured by bacteria, trauma, toxins, heat, or any other cause. The damaged cells release chemicals that cause blood vessels to leak fluid into the surrounding tissue. This is what causes that kind of characteristically inflamed swelling reaction. These chemicals also attract white blood cells to the area, whose job it is to digest and destroy the dead or damaged cells. These white blood cells also produce cytokines, which are messenger proteins, which further activate other cells in the immune system in a cascade of immune reactions that works together to heal the injured area. So ideally, the inflammatory response should only last for as long as the infection or injury exists. Maybe a couple hours, a couple days, maybe a couple weeks. But once that threat of infection has passed, the area should return to normal. This is what we think of as acute inflammation. It comes on quickly, resolves, and then kind of dissipates. However, when inflammatory chemicals are released on a continuous basis without injury or infection to confront, they go from healing the damaged cells to harming the healthy ones. This is what we think of as chronic inflammation. So what causes chronic inflammation? You know, there are a couple things that may bring about chronic inflammation. One might be encountering a pathogen, sort of a bad guy cell, right, that the body cannot break down, including some types of viruses or foreign bodies that remain in the system. Another trigger of chronic inflammation might be an overactive immune system or an autoimmune condition that results in the attack of normal tissue. A third trigger might be prolonged exposure to chemicals, irritants, or free radicals. You might think of smoking being a cause of inflammation that's repetitive, or excessive drinking, or exposure to environmental toxins. Chronic inflammation can result in the thickening and scarring of connective tissue. It can also result in cellular changes or even cell death. This is why chronic inflammation can actually increase your risk for various forms of chronic disease, some of which include dementia, heart disease, asthma, migraines, colitis, cancer, diabetes, depression. The list goes on and on. In fact, inflammation has been connected with half of the diseases on the CDC's top 10 causes of mortality. So the signs and symptoms of chronic inflammation can be varied, and there are some biomarkers that we can look at through lab tests that are involved in both acute and chronic inflammatory processes. Among these biomarkers are transcription factors, cytokines, those messenger proteins, and enzymes. So today I'm going to review just 3 that tend to be very well researched and kind of the most commonly tested. The first and foremost would be C-reactive protein, often shortened to CRP. And this is a substance produced by the liver that increases in the presence of inflammation. An elevated CRP is identified with a blood test and is considered a nonspecific marker for inflammation and disease. It can often signal the flare-up of a condition like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, and it can even be used to predict future conditions or even a cardiovascular event. For example, studies have shown that people with high CRP are more likely to suffer from a heart attack and develop insulin resistance, a precursor to full-fledged diabetes. So while testing CRP is really up to your healthcare provider based on your specific history and symptoms, if you have questions, it is important to discuss whether it's appropriate to test your CRP with your physician. Generally speaking, a CRP level less than 1 milligram per liter is considered low risk. A level between 1 and 3 is considered sort of average risk, and a level over 3 is considered high risk. So along with CRP, there are 2 others I'd like to cover today. One is interleukin-6, often called IL-6, and the other is tumor necrosis factor alpha. I'm just going to call that TNF-alpha for this presentation. And these are also often correlated with inflammatory conditions. Both IL-6 and TNF-alpha are elevated in rheumatoid arthritis and those who later develop diabetes. They're also often elevated in people who are at risk or currently undergoing treatment for cancer. A recent review from Rice University found that CRP and IL-6 levels were 50% higher in patients suffering from clinical depression. So you can see that these markers of inflammation are kind of seen across the spectrum of disease and conditions. So we know that these biomarkers may be elevated with chronic inflammation. But what about physical signs? It's really important to highlight that some people experience absolutely no signs or symptoms at all. Oftentimes the diagnosis of a condition like heart disease or diabetes or an autoimmune condition is the first sign that there's chronic inflammation going on in the body. I'm just going to cover, some other commonly seen signs and symptoms, but again, this isn't across the board. Everyone is different. In terms of skin conditions, swelling and redness are often a clear sign of inflammation, right? So if you, sprain your ankle or trip and fall and hit your knee, you would see that inflammation occur pretty quickly. But other skin conditions that are signs of inflammation may include things like gum disease, unexplained rashes, and even psoriasis, right? So the amount of psoriasis a person has on their skin may be indicative of the amount of inflammation in their blood vessels. Fatigue is another common one. It's often experienced by individuals living with a chronic illness, particularly a disease with an overriding inflammatory process. So conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, inflammatory bowel diseases, and there's a lot of research that has shown a correlation between fatigue and both IL-6 and TNF-alpha levels. The last one is pain. So, on a more obvious level, you think of inflamed or tender joints as a sign of inflammation with rheumatoid arthritis or fibromyalgia. But other experiences of pain, like abdominal pain, can be a symptom of inflammatory bowel disease. And interestingly enough, smoking, which we consider a very pro-inflammatory habit, is a well-known and established risk factor for chronic pain. So you can see how these different signs and symptoms can vary person to person, but are often interrelated with the inflammatory process as well as the risk for chronic disease. Let's talk a little bit about the link between weight and inflammation. So a lot of research has shown that excess body fat, especially when it's concentrated in the abdomen, is linked to chronic inflammation. Excess adipose tissue, which is a fancy word for fat tissue, is thought to generate pro-inflammatory cytokines, right? So inflammatory messenger proteins, such as those I just discussed, right? So the TNF alpha and the IL-6. So, in fact, IL-6 and CRP have been shown to correlate positively with BMI, and being overweight is a known risk factor for chronic inflammatory conditions, such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease. The good news is that multiple studies have shown that weight loss induced through diet and exercise can actually lower your risk for those chronic conditions such as diabetes and heart disease. But safe and healthy weight loss can also lower your levels of CRP and tumor necrosis factor alpha, that TNF alpha. So how does weight trigger inflammation? So, there are a couple theories on this. The most well-accepted theory is that as the fat cells enlarge with weight gain, the blood supply is reduced. This leads to hypoxia, a lack of oxygen, and oftentimes a rupture, a breaking open, which triggers an immune response, white blood cell infiltration, and the overproduction of pro-inflammatory mediators. So you can see how weight gain over time can kind of be linked to these chronic inflammation systemically throughout the body. Another good example of this process happening is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and that's inflammation that results when there's excess fat deposited in the liver. Just another example there. So what does this mean, right? So we all know the benefits of, maintaining a healthy weight and staying active and eating well, but it's important to monitor body composition as it affects to inflammatory processes, right? So some measures of body composition that can be helpful for you to monitor are body mass index, which is a calculation based on height and weight, as well as waist circumference, which gives you an idea of where the body fat is located. Generally speaking, an elevated BMI is considered anything over 25. And the waist circumference is gender specific. So waist circumference over 40 inches for men or over 35 inches for women is usually a marker for metabolic syndrome and considered a significant risk factor for inflammatory conditions. So although weight management is not the focus of today's talk, I want to reinforce the idea that weight, like all things, is multifaceted. It's really not the calories in, calories out approach we used to think, kind of taking a whole holistic approach to health. The Stay Fit plan takes this sort of four-prong approach where it takes addressing movement, your activities of daily life and exercise, your intake, of food, medications, water, alcohol, drugs, all of that, sleep. So many studies have shown the association between sleep and obesity, as well as inflammation, and then stress. Right, so stress is a big one that can affect your appetite, your metabolism, and kind of interrelated with sleep. It can affect the quality of your sleep. So again, I'm not going to dwell too much on weight management because I want to make sure that we cover the dietary parts as it relates to inflammation. But if you're interested, there's a lot of good resources on the wellness portal in the workbooks. So there's one on physical activity, on stress, on movement. So be sure to check that out. All right, so let's get into it. So we know that lifestyle factors like smoking and alcohol and exposure to toxins undoubtedly play a role in inflammation. But today we're really going to focus on food and how you can think about preventing inflammation and reversing inflammation through the foods that you choose and your daily life diet. So we're going to review these 4 components: phytonutrients, fiber, probiotics, and healthy fats. All right, so according to the CDC, only a third of adults consume the daily recommended amount of fruit, and even fewer meet their veggie quota. And that's adults, right? So the number for teens is actually worse than that. Low intake of plants, like fruits and vegetables, is a risk factor for many of the most life-threatening chronic diseases. I just want to pause and let that sink in for a minute, right? So the most basic behaviors, what we eat and drink on a daily basis, is actually a major risk factor for chronic disease. On the flip side of that, a high intake of plants is associated with disease prevention and longevity, right? So there's an inverse association between plant food intake and cardiovascular risk, heart attack, and mortality. And this can also be seen in those biomarkers I mentioned, right? So a high intake of plants like fruits and vegetables is also associated with a lower level of CRP and those other biomarkers I mentioned. So how do plants do this, right? So one explanation is that plants are a great source of phytonutrients. And what are phytonutrients? Phytonutrients are naturally occurring compounds in plant foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds that are thought to promote health and prevent disease. Phytonutrients act in different ways, right? But some of the ways they have been shown to benefit health is through acting as antioxidants to neutralize free radicals, and supporting the body's balance of antioxidants and free radical behavior. A recent prospective cohort study found an inverse association between total phytonutrient intake and type 2 diabetes risk, right? So we know that there's something to be said for eating more plants. So I just want to review quickly a couple different classes of phytonutrients. The 2 biggest ones I want to cover today are polyphenols and carotenoids. So one class of polyphenols are flavonoids, and these are found in fruits and vegetables as well as chocolate and wine and tea, and they've been shown to have anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, anti-cancer, neuroprotective, all the good stuff activities, and they work through different mechanisms. So you may have heard of the benefits of green tea, EGCG, let's see if I can pronounce epigallocatechin gallate found in green tea, and it's been shown that 3 cups or more daily of green tea is shown to reduce inflammation and reduce the risk of cancer reoccurrence. Quercetin is another flavonoid found in red onions and kale and a number of different fruits and vegetables that has anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and anti-carcinogenic activities in the body. Non-flavonoid polyphenols include curcumin, depending on who you ask, found in turmeric. And it's fun fact that research suggests that neither curcumin or turmeric taken orally is well absorbed unless you take it with black pepper. So there's a compound in black pepper called piperine that actually helps you use that beneficial phytonutrient in the turmeric and have that anti-inflammatory effect. Resveratrol is another one, right? So you think of wine, but it's also found in those dark-skinned fruits, and those have been shown to have anti-inflammatory effects and be beneficial for the body. Another group of phytonutrients are the carotenoids. So I'm sure you've heard of beta-carotene. We think of those orange carrots, but they're also found in yellow and red fruits. We think of lycopene from tomatoes as being a particularly beneficial compound. And there's a lot of research to show that these red, orange, and yellow fruits have anti-inflammatory properties, anti-cancer benefits, and just a fun fact about lycopene is it's more bioavailable in cooked foods. So having that, roasted tomatoes or that tomato soup can actually be a nice way to benefit from that lycopene. And it doesn't have to be all fruits and vegetables, right? So you may have heard of some of the benefits of herbs and spices. And there's a lot of research to show that some spices can actually turn off the pathways that trigger inflammation. So some beneficial ones include red pepper, cloves, ginger is a great one, cumin, anise, fennel, basil, garlic has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. It's actually been shown to suppress the inflammatory markers as well, so decrease those biomarkers I mentioned. So not only eating the rainbow, but also thinking about cooking with herbs and spices. One thing I want to mention before we move on is there's a certain class of vegetables called cruciferous vegetables that have been really well researched for their anti-inflammatory benefits. So there are a lot of benefits to eating cruciferous vegetables with the different vitamins and minerals, but they also have a sulfur-containing compound called glucosinolate, which breaks down into compounds that have been shown to reduce inflammation and help eliminate carcinogens from the body. So a lot of studies have been devoted to the benefits of cruciferous vegetables and its ability to prevent and reduce the risk for cancer. So a host of different kinds of cancers: bladder, lung, ovarian, prostate, pancreatic. A number of cancers have been, reduction in cancer risk associated with cruciferous vegetable intake. The proposed mechanism is that this glucosinolate compound can actually turn on your genes that suppress tumors, slow their growth, and promote cancer cell death. So pretty powerful there. So the recommendation for cruciferous vegetables is 2 to 4 servings a week. So a half a cup cooked is a serving, or 1 cup raw is a serving. You can see some examples here on the right: broccoli, Brussels sprouts, personal favorite, cauliflower, kale. These vegetables tend to be sort of the, quote, stinky vegetables. They have an odor when they're cooking. They can also cause some, GI, gastrointestinal effects, sort of a gassier vegetable, so it's important that you chew your food really well and start small, and you may benefit from trying these foods first cooked, which may be better digested before you go on to the raw version. So really the big picture point of this phytonutrient conversation is that you really want to eat the rainbow, right? So when you look at all the different colors, for example, on the image on your screen right now, there are different benefits to the green vegetables, to the red fruits and vegetables, to the blue fruits and vegetables. Phytonutrients tend to provide fruits and vegetables with that color. So when you eat a variety of colors, you ensure that you're meeting, the beneficial amount of these compounds. So a little bit of red, yellow, green, blue, purple, you name it. So while we talked about aiming for 2 to 4 servings of cruciferous vegetables a week, you really want to be aiming for a minimum of 5 servings of phytonutrient-rich, very bright and colorful fruits and vegetables every day. 5 to 10 servings a day, probably much higher than the average person eats, but certainly a good goal now that you know the benefits. Again, reiterating the benefits of herbs and spices, using turmeric with that black pepper, cooking with ginger, garlic, the more the better. It's also going to help you flavor your food, which is never a bad thing, always a good thing. So you may be asking yourself, why not just take a supplement, right? I really want to emphasize that dietary supplements have risks, right? So although manufacturers are required to follow specific regulations, the FDA does not review products for safety or efficacy until an adverse event is reported. That means that manufacturers do not have to get approval before producing or selling potentially harmful products. It also means that what they say is in the bottle may not actually be in the pill bottle. And third, it may not actually be doing anything, right? So it could be kind of money down the drain. There are also certain concerns over contamination and sort of dosing issues where dietary supplements can become actually hazardous to your health and unsafe. And the FDA and the NIH publish product safety advisories on their website, so you can check that out. And they also post recalls, market withdrawals, that kind of thing on their websites. And there are new ones popping up all the time. So these dietary supplements are actually, a risky thing to get into. They're also not as effective, right? So there's this concept of food synergy, the idea that the food works as a package with the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients that come, say, in an orange that you eat, is going to be way more beneficial, more better absorbed than, say, taking a vitamin C supplement. This also supports the idea that you want a variety of foods in your diet. So a really interesting study that was published in the Journal of Nutrition found that prostate tumors grew much less in animals that were fed tomatoes and broccoli together than rats who ate diets containing just broccoli or just tomatoes. And actually, the tumors grew much less than those who received supplements. So there's this idea that the food actually is going to be more effective, and it's going to work together with the other foods in your diet to promote health. There are also cases in which dietary supplements can actually increase the risk for some cancers. Treatment with beta-carotene, vitamin A, and vitamin E have actually been shown to increase mortality, and selenium supplementation has been associated with an increased risk for diabetes. So we think of these compounds and vitamins and minerals as healthy things, but when you isolate them and take them in high doses, you really don't know how it's going to affect you. This is especially true for people who are taking prescription medications. Flavonoid supplements may interfere with anticoagulants and increase the toxicity of certain drugs. And then CoQ10 has been contraindicated with warfarin. So it's really important that you think about food first, and also always, always, always talk to your doctor or healthcare provider before starting any new supplement. Okay, so we've talked about the phytonutrient component of the anti-inflammatory diet. Now we're going to move on to my favorite topic, which is fiber. So there's a lot of research that has shown an inverse association between dietary fiber intake and cancer risk. People who eat diets that are high in fiber also have lower levels of CRP. What's the mechanism? There are a couple, right? So it could be that a high fiber diet reduces inflammation by helping people maintain a healthy body weight, right? So if you're eating a high fiber diet, you're probably eating more plant foods, you're feeling full from that food because the fiber is kind of filling your stomach up. That's one proposed mechanism. Fiber also promotes GI health and regularity, right? So this is the body's main system for detoxification. You want your waste produced in your body to be moving through you quickly and efficiently. You don't want that kind of sitting in your body for long periods of time. The third, proposed mechanism that we're going to talk about in a little bit is fiber's effect on the gut flora. So the average American consumes about 15 grams of fiber a day. That's pretty sad, considering that the minimum is 25 grams a day, right? And the guidelines for men are actually a little higher due to their, generally being a little bit larger, requiring more calories, that kind of thing. So if you think about 25 grams as a minimum, let's think about your recent intake. If you've ever tracked your food with MyFitnessPal or a different sort of food calorie counter, look back and see what was your fiber like. Most people don't come close to the 25 grams, especially if you think, a cup of salad has only about a gram, a slice of whole grain bread has maybe 2 to 3 grams, an apple has 5 grams, right? So you'd have to eat 5 apples a day to meet that 25 grams. It's actually more challenging than most people think. So how do you do it? I think knowledge is power. Knowing where you are when you start is helpful. So take stock of your current diet and kind of find out what your average fiber intake looks like. Think about eating more fruits and vegetables, right? Whole grains, at least half of your grains should be whole grains. Beans and legumes punk a big fiber punch. So these are a great way to increase your fiber, especially if you're using them to replace an animal protein like a chicken or a beef that doesn't have any fiber in it. Having a veggie chili or a veggie burger might be a nice way to up the fiber without compromising your protein. Nuts and seeds are another example of a great high fiber plant food. Interestingly enough, although fiber supplementation has been shown to lower CRP levels, just like dietary fiber does, found in food, it's interesting that these studies show that fiber supplements like Metamucil, they don't lower CRP as much in overweight and obese people. So we really don't know for sure why. But my sneaking suspicion is that it's related to the way that fiber affects our gut flora. So dietary fiber is undigestible to us, right? We can't break it down. It kind of passes through our gut undigested. But the bacteria in our gut is able to break down various kinds of fiber into compounds like butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which are collectively called short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids serve as fuel for the cells of our colon. They can also pass into the bloodstream and act to send messages to other cells in the body, and by doing this, they mediate the suppression of inflammation in the gut and all over the body. About 70% of your immune system operates out of your gut, so it's no surprise that an imbalance in your gut flora can impact the health of the rest of your body. If your microbiome is off or damaged from a course of antibiotics or poor diet, the resulting inflammation is likely to fuel different conditions. So that could vary for the person: arthritis, depression, IBS, you name it. Researchers from Georgia State University found that mice placed on a low-fiber, high-fat diet, sort of typical of the standard American diet, experienced a dramatic shift in their microbiome. The common species of gut flora became more rare, and the rare species became more common. Overall, the size of the microbiome in these mice decreased tenfold. Right? Along with these changes in the microbiome, the mice also observed radical changes in their health. Their intestines got smaller, the mucus layer in their intestines got thinner, and as a result, the bacteria in their gut was able to move, sort of the bad bacteria in their gut was able to move closer to the intestinal wall, which in effect triggered an immune reaction. After a few days on the low-fiber, high-fat diet, the mouse intestines developed chronic inflammation, and after a few weeks, the mice began to put on fat, develop high blood sugar levels. So you can see how just the effect of diet not only affected the microbiome, but also, the physical, observable health and organs of these mice. Interestingly, when the researchers gave the mice a type of fiber called inulin, the mucus layer in their guts became healthier. The intestinal bacteria were kept at a safer distance because the layer of mucus, the layer of the bacteria along the intestinal wall was able to flourish again. So you can see how fiber had a huge impact on the health of these mice. Now, that's just one study conducted on mice, but lots of research has been dedicated to understanding the gut and how food affects our microbiome. And the next thing I'd like to talk about is a specific type of fiber called prebiotic fiber. So these fibers can be fermented by our gut bacteria. So common examples of prebiotics include fructooligosaccharides, inulin, galactooligosaccharides, very, very long names, right? Interestingly, breast milk contains oligosaccharides, and this has been shown to increase the bifidobacteria, a beneficial type of bacteria, in breastfed infants, which has been shown to strengthen the immune system and help establish a healthy intestinal microbiota in the babies. So I don't want you to get too, wound up worrying about these long words. Big picture is eat more fiber, right? And eat it from your food, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Some specifically good sources of prebiotic fiber. You can see some here on the screen, the garlic and the onions. You see leeks, asparagus, dandelion greens. Some other include bananas, artichoke, and whole wheat foods. And just to give you a visualization of what happens in the gut, so when you ingest dietary fiber, the type of fiber depends, but these fibers can be fermented by the gut bacteria, producing those short-chain fatty acids, which kind of travel through the body. They feed the colon cells, but they also travel through the body and promote anti-inflammatory processes. So pretty cool. So we just finished talking about prebiotics. Now we're going to talk about probiotics. So probiotics are live, active microorganisms that are ingested and alter the GI flora, and they're often associated with health benefits. So we kind of call these probiotics the good bacteria that can compete with the bad bacteria for real estate in our gut. The benefits of probiotics were first noticed centuries ago when people started eating fermented foods, and those same foods are still praised today for their health benefits. So you can see some listed up here on your screen: kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, or kefir, depending on who you ask, yogurt, kombucha. You can see a whole different assortment on the screen here. In addition to fermented foods, probiotic supplements are available in pill, powder, and chewable form. But it's important to note that there are hundreds of species and even more strains, so really kind of an infinity amount of types of probiotics. So we don't really have a good understanding right now of what we should be supplementing, when, in what dose, in what form. So I'm not able to provide you with a confident recommendation about a one-size-fits-all approach to supplementation. So right now the research is showing that really choosing foods that are rich sources of these probiotics is probably the best thing you can do for your health. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what the research is showing right now. So you see the probiotic species, the genus and the species, the benefits, and then the sources across the top. So the Lactobacillus acidophilus, this is a common one. It can help certain vaginal conditions, yeast infections, can treat diarrhea, boost immunity, and this type of probiotic is found in yogurt, lassi, kefir, miso, and tempeh. Some different lactobacillus strains you can see here found in yogurt and kefir, reduce the risk for infection and improve markers for fatty liver disease. You can see down onto the third column here, the Lactobacillus plantarum. This is found in more of the pickled vegetables, sauerkraut, things like that. And these has been shown to improve psychological health and immunity, metabolic conditions. Lactobacillus reuteri, this is one that's getting a lot of hype lately: reduction in inflammation and allergies, decrease in inflammatory markers, and again, found in the fermented and pickled vegetables as well as the yogurt and the kefir. Bifidobacterium infantis, this is a common one found in yogurt, as well as the Bifidobacterium bifidum. So I don't want you to get it too caught up in the names, the long names, what's what, just knowing that, probably yogurt is a wonderful thing to include in your diet, as well as kefir and those fermented and pickled vegetables, right? That's kind of the takeaway that we want to have from today's conversation. All right, so let's talk about healthy fats, last but not least. So fat is an essential macronutrient, and it plays many roles in our physiology and well-being. It provides us with energy, it helps with the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. And although all fats have the same amount of calories, research has shown that some types are healthier than others. So diets high in saturated and trans fats are pro-inflammatory in the body. So trans fats are those man-made fats that allow foods to stay, on the shelf a long time we recognize the term trans fat as being hydrogenated, fully or partially hydrogenated, and it's considered by most doctors to be probably the worst kind of fat you can eat. It raises your LDL, the bad cholesterol, and lowers your HDL, the kind of good cholesterol. It's also associated with an increase in CRP and IL-6. So it's important that you're reading food labels to look for that 0 grams of trans fat, but keep in mind that food companies can say it has 0 grams of trans fat if it contains less than 0.5 grams per serving. So this means that you really have to be looking at the ingredients list, not just the food label, the ingredients list, and look for that word hydrogenated. Fully or partially hydrogenated oils indicates the presence of trans fat. Saturated fats are generally found in animal products, and these have been shown to trigger inflammation in the gut and throughout the body. This may help explain why small increases in the risk of several cancers are associated with a high consumption of red meat and processed meat. So this is probably no news to anyone, but reducing your intake of red and processed meats is probably a really beneficial change that you can make right away. The grass-fed red meats are going to be a better choice. They're often higher in those omega-3s, so just something to consider. Unsaturated fats are generally plant-based fats, with the exception of omega-3 fats, which are commonly found in the fatty fish, and as I just mentioned, some of the grass-fed meats. And these have been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties in the body, especially when used to replace refined carbs or saturated fats. So omega-3s are, a type of polyunsaturated fat, and it's been shown that the intake of omega-3 fats is associated with anti-inflammatory processes and a decrease in those inflammatory biomarkers. So it's recommended to eat, 2 to 3 servings of fish a week, definitely avoiding those predatory fish that tend to be higher in toxins like mercury. Another type of polyunsaturated fat is omega-6. Research has shown that although the body needs the balance of omega-6 and omega-3, excess consumption of omega-6 from things like, corn oil, peanut oil, vegetable oil, mayonnaise, that kind of thing, can actually trigger the body to produce pro-inflammatory chemicals, and it can interfere with the conversion of the plant-based kind of omega-3, the alpha-linolenic acid found in things like flax and chia. It can interfere with that conversion into the EPA, DHA, the kind that we really want to focus on. That's the kind that's found in the fatty fish. So what's the takeaway here? Limit processed foods, right? Try to eat a whole food, plant-based diet. Mediterranean diet has a lot of research to support the healthy dose of those monounsaturated and omega-3 fats through the olive oil and fatty fish. And just to note, the research on supplementing with fish oil is mixed. So some research has shown that it can reduce blood pressure and triglycerides by up to 50%. Other studies show no benefit. So focusing again on food, which is more tightly regulated than the supplements. We already talked about some of the risks there. And just focusing on minimally processed, high quality food, a variety of foods, you get the picture. So I just want to take a minute to talk about this hot topic here. So we discussed the potential benefits of limiting saturated fats, and that reducing animal foods might be a good strategy to help you do this. When animal protein is comprising a big component of your diet, it's been shown to have higher levels of inflammatory biomarkers. In addition to monitoring the saturated fat intake and total meat consumption, it's important to consider how fats and proteins are cooked. So there's little question that grilling and baking are helpful alternatives to frying, right? Less oil, lower temperatures. These high temperature, dry heat cooking methods may not reign supreme for health. So advanced glycation end products are a group of compounds present in the body as a byproduct of normal metabolism. However, evidence is mounting in favor of the theory that excess AGE, promote oxidation and inflammation, leading to worsening health problems, inflammation, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, you name it. Ages have also been implicated to contribute to the aging process. High protein foods from animal sources are among the highest in ages, with beef and cheese topping the list. And in addition, cooking these foods at high temperatures can actually increase the level of age in the meat. Until recently, scientists really didn't worry too much about ages in the food because it was believed that the body didn't absorb that many of them, but new research shows that people absorb about 10%, which could be significant depending on your food choices and your preferred cooking method. So, if you are someone that loves the backyard barbecue, that high-tech cooking, when you see kind of the crispy blackened bits on the meat, something to think about being careful with the type and temperature of cooking. So does this mean we all need to go raw food? No, right? We already talked about tomatoes. When they're heated, it improves the bioavailability of the lycopene. Similarly, the lutein found in corn and spinach responds to heating. So there are benefits to cooking some foods. But if you cook meat in a liquid at low heat, you can help reduce the number of ages that are produced by the meat by as much as 50% compared to broiling or grilling. So that's why the slow cooking method is probably one of the safest and best ways to cook meat. A quick note on emulsifiers. So emulsifiers are commonly added to processed foods like mayo, ice cream, baked goods to create a smooth and consistent texture. Common emulsifiers include mono and soy lecithin, mono and diglycerides, polysorbates, carrageenan, guar gum. Those are just a few to name. And safety is carefully regulated by the FDA, and they've been shown to be GRAS, G-R-A-S, generally recognized as safe in precise amounts. But the FDA review process may not take into consideration those who rely heavily on packaged foods. Over time, the GRAS review process has evolved into a voluntary notification program, so many additives have not been tested. For your reference, carrageenan was reviewed and approved in 2017, but still, what about those people who rely really heavily on packaged food? A study published in Nature journal in 2015 found that carboxymethylcellulose, CMC, and polysorbate 80, P80, I'm going to call for short, led to weight gain, low-grade inflammation, and metabolic syndrome after 12 weeks. And this was a study conducted again in mice. At the follow-up, there were changes in the gut bacteria and increased risk for bowel cancer. And although the FDA reviewed and confirmed that the CMC, the carboxymethylcellulose, and the P80, the polysorbate 80, were safe at normal estimated exposure, it's just something to think about, right? So your exposure to these things, research is coming out all the time about their safety and what level is safe. So if you're concerned, the first step should be reducing your intake of processed foods. All right, let's summarize what we learned here. Eat more plants, right? A good strategy to do this is to make half your plate, at least at lunch and dinner, non-starchy vegetables, right? You want to reach that 5 to 10 servings of phytonutrient-rich plants daily and 2 to 4 servings per week of the cruciferous vegetables. Cook with herbs and spices. The more, the better. You can get creative in the kitchen, and make sure to emphasize a variety of brightly colored fruits and vegetables. So if you're just into the salad, maybe it's time to try, some sweet potatoes, some beets, some blueberries. Try to get that nice variety of colors. And lastly, try some plant-based proteins, right? So we know that beans, legumes, nuts, whole grains are great sources of protein, and if you're looking to kind of reduce your inflammation, replacing some of your meat-heavy meals with a plant-based option would have a really great effect overall. And again, focus on minimally processed whole foods. Nutrition tips continued here. To support the gut, you want to eat a minimum of 25 grams of fiber a day and consume some good sources of probiotics, so like the yogurt, the kefir, and the fermented and pickled vegetables. You want to reduce your intake of saturated and trans fats, refined and processed oils, which by transitioning to some more plant-based proteins and reducing your processed food intake, you're going to have that effect anyway. Aiming to have fish a couple times a week, avoiding the large predatory fish, and maybe incorporating some plant-based sources of those omega-3 like the flax, the chia, walnuts. These are some wonderful tips to help you continue your sort of anti-inflammatory journey here. The Nutrition Source on the Harvard School of Medicine Public Health site is a great site. You can stick that into your search engine and find it right away. The American Cancer Society and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they're all very reliable sources of nutrition information. There's so much out there that you really want to be careful about, not using things like blogs or advertisements to be your source of nutrition information. We'd love your feedback. If you can get your hands on a survey link, I'll try to post one in the notes here, but your feedback helps us guide future presentations, and it gives me feedback on how we can do better in the future, so your voice does matter. And then if you learned something today that you'd like to share, feel free to cite us on social media. We are on Instagram and LinkedIn at the Stay Fit Plan. You can hashtag SFP Nutrition. Thank you so much. Have a great day.